Welcome, everyone, to the continuation of our fresh insights into looking at the mysteries of Eden, and in particular, the Garden of Eden. And what I did in session 1 is read the brand new translation from Aramaic into English of chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Genesis. So now, today, we're going to go over the story, and we're going to open up the words in it so that we can understand it from an ancient point of view. How did the ancient peoples understand this story? To us, there's so many things in it. A talking serpent and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't mean anything to us here. But we'll explain all of that. So what we're going to do now is continue with our venture into the ancient Near East and into the land of Mesopotamia, or Beth Naharain, which is the ancient Near East, and the Assyrian people, and the Chaldean people, as well as the Hebrews. So the first 11 chapters of the Bible in Genesis has to do with this area of the ancient Near East. And even when you were to study Abraham, you'll find that Abraham came from Mesopotamia, from Ur. Some say in the southern part of Iraq, some say in the northern part of Iraq. Doesn't make any difference. He came from that area, from that custom. And now what we do, we're going to look at this story, and we're going to show you the common motifs. Why was man made from the soil? And why was there a serpent? Why all this? Now, in the first session, I left you hanging a little bit because of the last sentence in the story where it said that Yahweh God had stationed a krova, and at the garden path where Adam could not return to the tree of life, or the man could not return to the tree of life. Now what I'm going to do is show you what it looks like. In Hebrew it says cherubim or cherubim. Cherubim means guardians. What kind of guardians? You see, in the ancient Near East, in the gates of Babylon, in Mesopotamia, and that's toward the southern part of Iraq, they had what they call this. I'm going to show you their idea of a krova. And this is a bull with a man's head and wings. And this was at the special gates, 2 of them, guardians. That's what they would put there. Now, in Nineveh, which was northern Mesopotamia, in Nineveh, they had also cherubim. And these guardians, sometimes with a man's body and with the head of an animal. Then again, they had it as a complete human being with the head of a man, but always wings. In fact, when Ezekiel describes these special flying creatures that were carrying the throne of God, there were the cherubim under them. And they had 6 wings, but they had 4 heads. All this is symbolic of the ancient Near East. To us, it's strange, but not to people of the Near East, especially the ancient people. So, getting back now to the story of the garden. Why a garden? First of all, that's one thing they all dreamed about in the ancient Near East, was to have a paradise park. In fact, we're all familiar with one of the ancient wonders of the Near East, and it was called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. But you see, none of the historians have been able to come up with one shred of evidence that Babylon had any hanging gardens. But now historians have discovered that Nineveh and the Assyrian king Sennacherib is the one who had the hanging gardens. In fact, there's a whole rock stone relief showing you the garden, and in the cuneiform, on the clay tablets, it also describes this garden. So now they're making new discoveries about it. So even the Assyrian king had to have a special garden, and it was tiered. The reason why it was called the Hanging Gardens or the Hanging Paradise was because it was tiered. And the wonderful history on that, you'll have to check it by doing research on it. I've had the books on it, but I only mention it just to show you that this was not unusual to tell a story about a garden paradise park where all kinds of trees were growing. Now we're going to look at it, and I'm going to open it up according to the Aramaic words and what they're saying. And we're going to look at it anew. All right? Starting with verse 4 in chapter 2. This is the history. Literally what it says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. But what it means is, this is the tale, this is the story, or these are the descendants of the people of the heavens and the earth in the day that Yahweh God created the heavens and the earth. Now, why does it say Yahweh? Why didn't I say Lord God? Well, you see, when they told stories, the gods were always involved, and the names of the gods were involved. Whereas in the first chapter of creation, the name of God is not revealed. It's just simply a deity, a creator, an invisible something that we don't know much about, brought everything into being. Now, in the second chapter, a story is going to develop, a history. So it's telling us, it's giving us the description what everything was like. Now, all the trees of the field were not yet throughout the land. They were still in the ground, hadn't fully come up yet. And all the grass of the field had not yet sprouted. Why? Because Yahweh God had not sent down rain upon the surface of the ground. And besides, there was no earthling to cultivate the soil. Now, why did I use the word earthling? You'll see in a minute. Then it tells us, but there was a powerful spring that was gushing forth out of the earth and was watering the entire surface of the ground. So it was getting ready to bring production. Then here's the reason why I didn't say Adam. So Yahweh God formed an earthling. Our scriptures say formed Adam from the soil of the earth. Okay, the reason I use the word earthling instead of Adam is because the name Adam, A-D-A-M, Adam is how we say that, Adam. And the word for ground, or the soil there, is Adamah. So I'm saying Adam, and I'm adding an A. A-D-A-M-A. Adam. And Adamah, or Adama, either way you want to say it. And this is why I say I don't use the word Adam, because it's not a name here. It's showing you the earthling because he's made of earth. This is the story here. This goes way, way back. The soil of the earth. Remember, I told you we're going to look at the common motifs that were in existence in the ancient Near East. All the ancient myths that were written in the cuneiforms, on the clay tablets, when the gods got ready to create man, this is very interesting. When the gods got ready to create human beings, what they did was they called a goddess. And the goddess name is very interesting. The goddess name is Mommy. That's her name, Mommy. And she took clay, that is the soil of the earth, but they also took the blood of a god and they mixed it, and Mommy made the first human being. These are the stories coming from Nineveh and Babylon and from these cuneiform writings. So this was not unusual for then the Lord God to take the soil and to create an earthling. He created the earthling because this is what the ancient beliefs were at that time. So Yahweh God formed the earthling from the soil of the earth. That is the humus. And that's why we call it human being, from humus, the top rich soil. And literally, it means the red earth, the oxide that was in the red earth, which means it has oxygen in it. So he formed this red earthling. And why did he form it? It just says, and he formed the earthling from the soil of the earth and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. Again, we have to look at the customs of the ancient Near East. Why did he blow into his nostrils the breath of life, the breath of God? Now, of course, the spiritual spin on it is that this earthling has a spiritual nature, an airy nature, a breath nature. It does mean the breath. It does mean that. But it means the spiritual sense of being. He's going to realize he's more than an earthling. He has a physical body, an earthly body, but he has this breath in him. And blew into his nostrils. Because God had to clear the nostrils so he could breathe. In the Near East, the midwives, when the baby was born, blew into the nostrils of the baby to clear the baby so the baby could start breathing. You know, we used to spank the children on the backside to get them to move and cry out and take a breath. So it is with humanity here. This is a story. So God blows into this earthy being, clears the nostrils, so that the earthly being can breathe and become alive. And that's why it says, and the earthling became a living being. Now that word being is nausha. Nausha. A living breath. He became a living breath. Nausha is Aramaic for nephesh of Hebrew. Same identical word, just spelled differently. Same word. And not spelled differently. I didn't mean to say it is spelled exactly the same way, but pronounced differently. We say nausha in Aramaic, but nephesh in Hebrew. So he became a living being. So as a result of blowing into the nostrils and on the face, on the countenance, on the face of this earthling or groundling, you can also translate it groundling, soiling, he was able to breathe and become a living being. Now, formally, now what's happening, it's leaving us for a minute and taking us back something that God had done before. Now, formally, Yahweh God had planted a garden paradise in Eden. So Eden is a real place. But the park is part of the tale or the story. But everything grows wild and naturally there in Eden. And it's in northern Mesopotamia. My mentor, Dr. George M. Lamsa, and I have a picture of him here, Dr. George M. Lamsa, he's the first one to translate the entire Bible, which was finished in 1957, of the entire Bible translated from Aramaic into English. And you notice in the background there the Aramaic words. Well, he completed the Bible then. He was from this area. At that time, this area was owned by Turkey. I have here in my office a whole full newspaper on, it was printed in 1965, it says, "On to the Garden of Eden," because Turkey opened up that area for venturesome tourists. So there is this place where everything grows wildly and naturally there. But here it's becoming a story. So Yahweh God had planted a garden paradise in Eden. Some translate it eastward in Eden. Either way, it is correct. Formerly he had planted it, or in earlier times he had planted it because he was getting ready to put the earthling there. So he put the earthling there whom he had formed. Then, it says, from the ground Yahweh God caused to grow every tree that is desirable to look upon and scrumptious to eat. Now that word, desirable to look upon, we say to desire it. But this word is really strong in Aramaic. It means you got to have it. When you see these fruits, when you see these trees, in other words, you start to lust after them because they're so good. If you see a real ripe fruit hanging from the tree, see, most of our fruit is picked before they're really ripe. But when you have a garden paradise, these trees and all the fruits on them, you cannot help but want to go grab them and eat them. So the word desirable really means you want to lust after them because of the way they are. And then it says, good to eat, which means scrumptious to eat. But then it mentions these two other trees, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden paradise. And there was a second tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Now, I've got to really explain this, because even though the writer doesn't go on to explain it here, the word sometimes is always translated the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. First of all, we got to realize that both these trees are metaphors. There were no literal trees. They're metaphors. All this is metaphorical. The tree of life is a metaphor. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not a good translation there. God cannot be the creator and the source of evil. He would not set up a tree that was evil. And then later on, he's going to tell the earthling not to touch that tree and not to eat from it. And yet he made it very desirable to look upon, and he made the fruits very desirable to, in other words, that you want to eat it and look after it. And yet he said, don't you touch it. You know why? Because God knows us. The minute I say don't touch it, something gets aroused in us. For instance, if we see a sign that says wet paint, what does that mean? It means don't touch it, wet paint. But you know what we want to do? There's something in it that wants to touch it to see. Or if I said, I have something here, I don't know if I should show it to you or not. You can hardly wait for me to show it to you, because it's in our nature to tell me not to go to something, not to touch something, to make it forbidden makes me want to see it, makes me want to touch it. So I'm hinting at something here, but I'm not going to tell you now. But I want to talk about this tree. The tree of life, by the way, the symbolism and the metaphorical meaning of the tree of life refers to our entire nervous system, the entire nervous column, which starts with the brain and all the way down the spinal column, and it blossoms like a tree. The brain blossoms. The top of the spinal column is the brain, and it goes down, and everything in this spinal column is attached to every organ. Everything in your body is attached to the tree of life. We carry the tree of life within us. But what about this other tree? Okay. This tree of the knowledge, we can also say of the perception of good and bad, doesn't mean evil in the sense of something sinister. It means the tree of good and bad. You know, everything we do, let me put it this way. We have a term for this. It's called merism. M-E-R-I-S-M. Merism means a totality of knowledge. In other words, you see what's good about it and what's not so good about it. See, but the word evil gives us a different connotation. We think of dualistic. No, this is merism. Like I say, heaven and earth. So that means we're going to talk about everything between heaven and earth. If I say night and day, so we're talking about a total comprehensive knowledge. If I say black and white, we're talking about a total, things that are in the dark, things that are in the light. This is how they talked in the ancient Near East. It's not talking about God set up a sinister tree that if you touch it, it will do something sinister to you. But he's warning them about something, about this tree, that not to disobey a voice. What the real essence is when he tells later on the earthling, you're not to touch it, what he tells them that is, will you follow my voice? Will you obey what I'm telling you? But that makes it more enticing. We'll get to that a little bit later. So now we see the two trees differently. We understand what the two trees are about. Then verses 10 through 14 talks about, it leaves us, and it talks about a river that was flowing out of Eden, and there were four of them, Pishon, Gishon, and Declath and Prath. We know the names of two of those rivers. One is called the Tigris, the other is called Euphrates. They think they know, some scholars think they know the third one, which would be the Nile, but we're not sure. And the first one we don't know at all. All that we know is at that time there were these four basic rivers that help irrigate the land. And it helped irrigate the garden paradise, this particular river, which kept things flowing. So here was paradise, a perfect setup. And here is the earthling. So we go to the next verse. So Yahweh God had taken the earthling, it's past tense now, he had taken the earth and left him in the garden park of Eden so that he might cultivate it and watch over it. That is, keep it clean and protect it from animals coming in there and partaking of things they shouldn't have. And another thing I forgot to mention, which I'll do right now, is why was it in the center of the garden? The very center. Because in the Near East, they always put the prize and the most possessive, powerful trees that you could own were put in the center of the garden. And notice, the tree of life is in the center of our being. It's what keeps us together. The spinal column, the brain, all of that going all out. We're one being. So we are this paradise, but we can change this paradise into something else. And now there is this comprehensive knowledge. This, the pros and cons. The pros and cons, like for instance, if you buy a home, sometimes you like everything in it and some things you don't like in it. The next home you have, you make sure you don't get that. Same thing with anything we do. There's always the pros and cons, the good and the bad. It doesn't mean evil. This is the meaning of it. Okay. So Yahweh God commanded the earthling and said to him, from all the trees of the garden paradise you may eat as much as you want. It's yours. Eat. No one's holding you back. Whatever you want, eat as much as you want. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you will not eat from it, because in that day that you might eat from it, a death you will die. He's not threatening him, he's warning him. It's like you take a child and you show the child fire, and you bring the child's hand close to the fire to show the danger, because if you put the hand in the fire, it'll burn your hand. So you say the word burn, but you let them feel the heat. So God wasn't threatening them. He's just saying, if you open it, if you touch this, and if you eat from it, something's going to happen. And when they did eat from it, they did not die. Not right away. Because I'm going to tell you in some more things about it. But we'll have to do that when we come to that portion of it. So now, after admonishing the earthling, now remember, this is a story. God's thinking about it, and he's looking at the earthling, and he said, that's why it says, and God said. It means he's thinking. You remember, it's a story, so God can think. And he says, it's not good for the earthling to be alone. And now we start a whole new side of this story. And with this, we will continue in our third session of Understanding the Garden of Eden story.